It was a dark and stormy night when I decided to answer the ad on Craigslist. It was for a cheap rental in a remote part of town, just the kind of place I could afford on my meager salary. I arrived at the address, a dilapidated old house on the outskirts of town, and knocked on the door. No one answered, but the door was unlocked, so I let myself in. The inside of the house was even more run down than the outside. The wallpaper was peeling, the floors were creaky, and the furniture was old and worn. I made my way to the back of the house, where I found a small room with a single bed. It was musty and damp, but it was cheap, and I was desperate for a place to stay. I unpacked my things and settled in, but I soon realized that I wasn't alone in the house. I could hear strange noises coming from the floors above me and the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible to sleep with the constant noise. The next morning, I decided to explore the house and see if I could find out who was making the noises. I crept up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and entered the room. Inside, I found a scene straight out of a horror movie. There were bodies everywhere, their lifeless eyes staring at me in shock and horror. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I ran back down the stairs and out of the house, never looking back. I never did find out who was responsible for the killings, but I knew that I had to leave that place as soon as possible. I never answered another ad on Craigslist again. I didn't think anyone would ever find out about what happened in that house. But I was wrong. A few weeks after I fled the scene, the police showed up at my door. They had traced the killings back to the Craigslist ad and had found my name on the lease. I was arrested and charged with murder. I protested my innocence, but no one believed me. I was convicted and sent to prison, where I spent the rest of my life. And every night, I would lay awake in my cell, listening to the sounds of the other prisoners pacing back and forth, just like the footsteps in the house on Craigslist. I knew that I was never alone, and that the horrors of that place would haunt me forever. As I stood in the courtroom, listening to the prosecutor lay out their case against me, I couldn't believe what was happening. I had answered a simple ad on Craigslist, looking for a cheap place to live, and now I was being accused of murder. I looked over at the jury, trying to plead with my eyes for them to believe me, but they just stared back with cold, unsympathetic gazes. The evidence against me was damning. The police had found my fingerprints all over the crime scene, and the witnesses had placed me at the house on the night of the murders. I knew that I had to come up with a better defense if I wanted to avoid spending the rest of my life in prison. I hired the best lawyer I could afford, but even they struggled to come up with a compelling argument on my behalf. The prosecution painted me as a desperate and lonely man, driven to madness by the isolation of the remote house. They presented gruesome photos of the crime scene, showing the brutal way in which the victims had been killed. As the trial went on, I could feel the weight of the evidence bearing down on me. The prosecution's case was airtight, and I knew that my chances of being acquitted were slim. I thought back to that night, trying to remember any details that could help me, but it was all a blur. I had been so scared and confused, and now I was paying the price. In the end, the jury found me guilty of all charges. I was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I was led away in shackles, my future as bleak and desolate as the house on Craigslist. And as I sat in my cell, staring at the walls, I knew that I would never be able to escape the horror of that place. It would haunt me for the rest of my days. As I frantically scrolled through Craigslist, trying to find a cheap replacement for the phone I had lost only days before, I came across an ad that caught my eye. It was for a brand new iPhone, still in the box, and at a price that was too good to be true. I quickly exchanged messages with the seller, agreeing to meet him at a secluded spot in the park to complete the transaction. I arrived at the designated time, my heart pounding with excitement at the thought of finally getting my hands on a new phone. But as I approached the spot where the seller was supposed to be waiting, I realized something was off. The area was eerily quiet, with no sign of anyone else around. I hesitated, wondering if I should turn back and find a more public place to complete the sale. But before I could make a decision, a figure emerged from the shadows, a hooded figure with a knife in his hand. "Give me your money," he growled, his eyes dark and menacing. I froze. I didn't know what to think or how to react. Luckily for me, in my state of confusion, he didn't act. He just looked at me with those dead eyes, eyes that looked like they could snuff out a person without any care in the world. When I found my words again, I tried to reason with him. I gave him all my money, but then he still didn't go away. It was at this point that I knew the money was just an excuse. His main goal was to kill me. When this thought appeared in my head, my heart started racing and I could feel my heart beat very loud. As if he could also hear it too, he gave me a huge grin, as if saying this will be the last face I will ever see in my life. I tried to back away, but he was too fast. He lunged at me, the knife glinting in the dim light as he swung it wildly. I could feel the cold metal grazing my skin, leaving a trail of stinging cuts in its wake. I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty park as I struggled to break free from his grasp. He pulled my hair, trying to yank me closer, but I managed to wrench myself away and run towards my car. As I fumbled with the keys, trying to unlock the door and get inside, I could hear his footsteps pounding behind me. He was gaining on me, his knife still raised and ready to strike. I finally managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside, locking it behind me just as the thief reached the car. He slammed his fist against the window, his face twisted in rage as he tried to open the door. I frantically started the engine, my heart pounding in my chest as I sped away from the park. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my home, tears streaming down my face as I realized how close I had come to becoming another victim of a Craigslist killer. All I wanted was a phone. This was a good wake-up call to always make sure to meet someone with a friend. As the sun began to set on a dark and stormy night, I logged onto Craigslist in search of a cheap apartment to rent. I had recently moved to the city for a new job, but I was struggling to make ends meet on my meager salary. After scrolling through countless listings, I finally stumbled upon the perfect apartment. It was in an older building, but it was spacious and affordable. I quickly sent off an email to the landlord, and to my surprise, he responded almost immediately. The landlord, a man named Mr. Jones, told me that he was currently out of town, but that I could move in as soon as I wanted. He even offered to let me stay for free for the first month. I was skeptical, but the offer was too good to pass up. I packed my bags and headed to the address Mr. Jones had given me. When I arrived, I was shocked to find that the apartment building was old and run down. It looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The windows were cracked and covered in cobwebs, and the paint was peeling off the walls. But I was determined to make the best of it. I lugged my bags up to the third floor and unlocked the door to my new apartment. As I stepped inside, I was greeted by the musty smell of mold and decay. The walls were peeling, and the floors were covered in dust and debris. I tried to ignore the creepiness of my new surroundings and began to unpack my belongings. But as I was putting away my clothes, I noticed something strange. There were scratches on the walls and deep gouges in the floorboards. It looked like someone had been trying to escape from the apartment. My heart began to race. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed Mr. Jones's number, but there was no answer. I tried to leave the apartment, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut from the outside. Panicked, I began to search for another way out. I discovered a hidden door in the back of the closet that led to a narrow staircase. I stumbled down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a dark and damp basement. It was filled with old boxes and broken furniture. I could hear the sound of something moving in the shadows, and I could feel a presence watching me. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the ground. I was trapped. And as the darkness closed in around me, I realized that I was not alone in the apartment. I was being hunted by something evil, something that had been waiting for me in the shadows. I could hear its breathing getting closer and closer. I could feel its hot breath on my neck. And then I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes peering at me from the darkness. I screamed and screamed, but no one heard me. And as the creature finally emerged from the darkness, I knew that I would never leave the apartment alive. It was a monster with sharp claws and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. I tried to fight back, but it was no use. The creature overpowered me, dragging me deeper into the darkness of the basement. And as the light faded from my eyes, I knew that this was the end. I was just another victim of the Craigslist monster.